How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samachay, Daf 65 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 65, I like it. Let's say that. I like the Daf. I like Daf. I'm a fan of Daf 65. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to wrap up kosher birds, right? We've been talking about birds for a while. We're going to kind of put a ribbon on it. Is that the phrase? We're going to put a ribbon on it. I don't know if that's a phrase, but we're going to wrap it up. And after that, we're going to move on to grasshoppers. Grasshoppers that we're allowed to eat. So anyways, when it comes to the grasshoppers, so there's going to be a big brisa, a Tana Dever Bishmal about Klal, Ufrat, and we're going to go through it step by step. So that's kind of what's happening in Daf Samach Hey Amid Beis. But so I think I like it. It's kind of working through the daf. Yeah, we're going to have to keep, a few things in our head, but I think it should be cool. Friends, come join me. Let's have a great time and study Daf Samachay, Daf 65 of Masechta Chullin. Okay, friends, we begin on Daf Samachay, Amid Aleph 2, 4, 6 lines into Daf Samachay, Amid Aleph. Aval Amru Chacham Kol Of V'chuli. That is a reference back to our Mishnah. That, of course, we had said in the Mishnah that when it comes to animals and when it comes to fish, the Torah is explicit what the signs of kosherness is by an animal chewing its cud, split hooves, by a fish that is fins and scales, which we'll learn about tomorrow. When it comes to birds, there are no such specifics. Rather, of course, we have a list of 24 birds, or as we've learned about, really types of birds that we do not eat, that are not kosher. However, the Chacham kind of retrofitted certain rules to the kashrus of birds. So, Tanya, we learn in a brayso from Gamliel Omer, says from Gamliel, Dores ve'ochel bi'adua shehu tame. Oh gosh, sorry. Okay. Tanya, I'm just reading that again. Doris ve'ocha b'yadoshu tami. Any bird that is doris. Doris it's like a little bit tricky to define because there's so many definitions of it. But essentially, if it's a bird that is like a bird of prey that uses its claws to grab its prey, let's say, so there were a few pshat, right? Rashi actually gave a pshat on Daf Nun Tes on the Mishnah, another pshat I think on Daf Samach Beis. One of them was that he picks if you use a bird that uses claws to his feet to pick up food and eat it. Different shot was that he uses his feet to hold down, let's say, bread while he eats it. Rabbeinu Tam had said that a bird, like a bird of prey that uses its claws, its talons to grab its prey and eat it while it's still alive. The Ramban had something similar, kind of a bird of prey. Anyways, so any bird that is dores is a sure tell sign that it is a non-kosher bird. We don't need to be consuming that energy. Yeshlo etzba yisera, if it has an extra toe, vizefek, and a zefek, v'korkivanu niklaf, and its korkivan is peelable, biadua shehu tahor, so it is a tahor bird. There's actually a shtickle machlekes Rashi and Tosfos about this. Rashi understands this to mean that in addition to it not being a dores, right? So first you have to establish that this bird is not a dores, right? If it, as we said, I think it was Gamliel just said that if a bird is dores, we don't want it. We don't want to eat it. So Rashi says, once you've established that a bird is not dores, in addition, you're going to check for that extra toe. You're going to check for the existence of a zefek and for a peelable korkavan. So a total of 4 simanim. Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, on Daf Samach Aleph, Taka, he wrote that no, if you find that a bird has the extra toe and as a zefek and as a korkavan that's niklaf, a peelable korkavan, so then you know that it is not a doris, and memele, it is not a doris, and it is kosher. Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok Omer, says Reb Elazar Reb Tzadok, Motchin lo chut shel meshicha im cholik es raglav shtayim lechan v'shtayim lechan tamei, shalosh lechan ba'achas lechan tahor. Right, this is what we had learned about already in our Mishnah. Right, what did it say in the Mishnah? Right, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok Omer kol of acholek es raglav tamei. Right, which is what we're describing over here. Right, we saw the other day that like a chicken, when it's standing on a piece of wire or something, so it'll have all three of its toes in the front, and then it has obviously its back toe in the back. However, other birds, if a bird, when standing on like a wire or something, has two of its toes in the front and two in the back, so then that is an indication that it is not kosher. Let's read that again. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok says Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Tzadok, Motchin lo chud shel mashicha. We make taut a string, a thread. Imcholik es raglav shtaim lechan shtaim lechan. If the boyd stands on the thread with two of its toes in front and two behind, tamei, it is a non-kosher bird. Shalosh lechan v'achas lechan tar. But if three of its toes are in the front and the fourth one is behind it, it is kosher. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer. Reb Shimon ben Elazar adds, this is a new one. Kol of akolet min ha'avir. Any bird that can snatch out of the air. If it can snatch stuff out of the air, you can play catch with it and it'll snatch stuff in its beak. So that is tamei. Tziparta nami mikalit kalto b'fregdi gemara. But a tziparta, which is a kosher bird, is able to do this, possesses this skill to be able to pull things out of the air, grab things and catch things in midair. Abai says, Abai koled ve'ochel coming in. We're talking about snatching things in midair and sending it down their hatch and eating it. That is what we're saying. A bird that snatches food midair and eats it, that is a tamei bird. But a bird that you could play catch with it, that sounds really nice. It sounds nice. You throw a ball and it catches it in its beak and it flies it back to you. That sounds like a very nice way to spend an afternoon. Acherim say acherim shachen im tmeim tameim torim tor. If a bird is hanging out with storches and pelicans and what's that other nasty bird? The herons and what were the names of those other birds? Here. And cormorants and hoopos and rollerbirds and shrikes and vultures. If this is the bird's company, by association, it's a tamei bird. Right? Again, acherim says acherim shachen im tmeim, a bird whose friends are these tamei birds. Tamei, it is a tamei bird. Im tahorim, but if it's hanging out with chickens, tahor, it is a tahor bird. Come on, who's this like? Rabbi Eliezer, it's like Rabbi Eliezer. If you remember from Daf Samich Beis, from Daf Samich Beis, there was a machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chacham regarding a zarzir. Rabbi Eliezer had said that a zarzir is a non-kosher bird. The Chacham had said that a zarzir is a kosher bird. So we're saying that this is like Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanya we learned about in a brayso. Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Eliezer, lo lechinam olach zarzir eitzel orev. It's not for naught, i.e., that's double negative. So the positive way to say it, there is a good reason why the zarzir hangs out with the orev, hangs out with the crows. Because it is the same type as the crows and it is non-kosher like the crows. So we want to say that this is the shita of Rabbi Eliezer, that Rabbi Eliezer has this concept of did I say guilty by association, right? That if its friends are non-kosher, so then it is non-kosher, as we see by the zarzir. It hangs out with the crows, and therefore we determine it is non-kosher. Afilu tema rabbanan. No, you can even say that Acherim's statement drives with the Chachamim, because the Chacham disagreed with Rabbi Eliezer when it came to the zarzir, because the zarzir hangs out with the crows, but it doesn't look like a crow. So Rabbi Eliezer said the fact that the zar's ear hangs out with the crows is enough for us to determine that it's tamei. The Chacham say it's not enough. It doesn't look like a crow. It's not enough. However, the Chacham would agree that a bird that hangs out with tamei birds and looks like a tamei bird, there we could argue that even the Chacham would say that it is a tamei bird. And with that, we conclude our extended discussion of birds. Now the Gemara quotes from our Mishnah of Achagovim kol sheyeshlo v'chulei. Essentially, we are moving on to the section of the Mishnah that discusses grasshoppers. My Rubo, we had said by the grasshoppers that. So what are the 4 signs of for a kosher grasshopper? Who can tell me what the 4 signs of a kosher grasshopper are? 4 legs. It's got to have 4 legs. It's got to have 4 wings. It's got to have these 2 jumper legs. These like big, tall jumper legs. And its 4 wings need to cover most of its body. So now the Gemara says, "My Ruba, what does the wings covering most of its body mean?" Amar of Yehuda Amarab Rov Orko. It means that the wings have to cover most of the length of the body. My Ruba, what's the width? Amar of Yehuda Amarab Rov. Wait, what did I just say the same thing? My Ruba Amar of Yehuda Amarab Rov Orko. V'amrila, V'amrila Rov Hakefo. Some say it is a majority of the width. I'm going to read that again. My Ruba, what's the majority? Amr of Yudah Marav Rov Orko. Says of Yudah name of Rav, a majority of the length. V'amrila Rov Hakefo. Some say the majority of the width. Amr of Papa says of Papa Hilkach. Therefore, because we have the 2 shitas, majority of the length, majority of the width, Va'inan Rov Orko, Va'inan Rov Hakefo. We go with both. So, grasshoppers that have wings that cover a majority of the length and a majority of the width, enjoy. Friends, if you ate grasshoppers, how would you eat them? Like, I don't have a recipe for it. I could probably look one up on YouTube or something, but I'm a little nervous. I don't really want to watch people like cooking bugs. That stuff's nasty. I've seen it before. It's gross. Okay, let's go weiter. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ein lo achshav v'aseh legadel le'achar zman. What if you have a grasshopper that doesn't currently have jumper legs? Those are those special I didn't make slides today. I don't know. We've seen these things before. And also it's Erev Shabbos. But we've seen these before, right? Cheva, do you need me to make slides for the jumper legs? Come on. It's grasshopper. Got the big jumper legs. Goes like up real tall. So if it doesn't currently have jumper legs, but it's going to grow them. It hasn't yet grown its jumper legs. Right? So like the zachel. Mutter, it is you can eat it. You could you could fry it with a little butter and salt. You could fry it up with a little butter and salt, and it's mutter. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi says Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Yossi Asher lo kra'im, that the pasuk says about the jumper legs, Asher lo kra'im, that it has these jumper legs, but it's actually written Lamed Aleph, which means no. But we read it as though it says Lamed Vav, which is it. Asher lo kra'im, that it has these jumper legs, but it's written lo, that doesn't have, i.e. afal pisha ein lo achshav, even though it doesn't currently have jumper legs, but ultimately it's going to grow jumper legs. It's kosher. My zachal, what's a zachal? Amar Abaye? Askara. Zachal is askara. Okay. Sounds great to me. All right, we've now got a big push through Daf Samach Hey Amid Beis. Here we go. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Now this is a brisa from Toras Kohanim. Toras Kohanim is the Medrash Halacha on Sefer Vayikra. I believe that would also be known as Sifra. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Es eile mehem tochlu. These are the grasshoppers that you can enjoy. Fry with a little butter, a little salt. Es eile mehem tochelu. So arbe v'gomer. So let me read you that pasuk. Es eile mehem tochelu. You can eat these. So arbe limino. Ve'esa salam limineu. Ve'esa chargo limineu. Ve'esa chagov limineu. So we saw 4 examples of grasshoppers that you can eat. Arbe, Salam, Chargol, and Chagov. And by each one it says Limineu. Now, Arbe ze Govoi. Arbe is Govoi. Salam ze Russian. Salam is Russian. Chargol ze Nipol. Chagov ze Gadian. Great. How come each of these grasshoppers listed in the pasuk, each one also says some version of limino, its type? Lehavi, to bring the following 4 grasshoppers: Tzipores kromim, Yochana Yerushalmis, the Jerusalem Yochana. I wonder if maybe I passed the Jerusalem Yochana on my way to the shuk. The Hartzuvia and the Razvonis. They are included by all these liminos and mineus, etc. Okay, before we move on to the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, which is going to basically take us to the end of the daf, although we're going to push forward to Samach Vav a little bit. So what, friends, what just happened? What just happened there? What happened there is the following. What happened there is that the pasuk mentions 4 grasshoppers that you're allowed to eat. And each one says the mineu, which comes to include another 4. That is it. That is it. These are the 8, essentially, grasshoppers that you can eat. We're going to see that essentially, we're going to see on Daf Samach Vav that the machlokes between the Bryce and Torres Kohanim and the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel is if we learn these psukim as klal ufrat or as klal ufrat uchlal. What does that mean? What that means is that actually if we look at the previous pasuk, the pasuk before the one that we read a few minutes ago, it says, Ach es zeh tochlu mikol sheretz ha'of ha'holech al arba asher lo kra'ayim mimal l'raglov l'nater boyen al ha'aretz. That the previous pasuk, the pasuk that we just read now, says that you can eat any grasshopper that has these jumper legs. That's a klal. You can eat any grasshopper that has these jumper legs. But then, the next pasuk gives 4 examples. The arbe, the salam, the chargol, and the chagov. So the question is, what exactly is going on there? It also says limino for each of them. So the Bryce and Torres Kohanim understands this as a klal ufrat play. Klal ufrat. Who could tell me how klal ufrat works? Maybe Reb Nil. Reb Nil, is klal ufrat like one of your things? One time we were discussing klal ufrat uchlal, and I think Reb Nil, we were discussing. We were part of the discussion, I think. Akoponim. So, how does klal ufrat work? The way klal ufrat works is that you have a general rule followed by some specifics, and when you have a klal followed by a prat, its own the net result is limited only to those things, those items that were specified. I.e., the first pasuk says you can eat any grasshoppers that have these jumper legs, but then we gave 4 examples. Each one also said the mineus, so that came to include an additional 4, so 8. It's limited to these 8 grasshoppers that you can eat. That is it. As we're going to see, the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, however, learns it as klal ufrat uchlal. Who could tell me how klal ufrat uchlal works? The way that klal ufrat uchlal works is that, well, you have that initial klal, followed by a prat, which we said basically you have the klal, the prat limited to only those things, but the next klal comes to once again expand it to include things similar to the prats. So in this case, we have arbe, salam, chargol, chagov. So we're going to be including other grasshoppers that are similar to those that were specified. That's how the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel learns it. So basically, we have the first pasuk that talks about any grasshoppers that have jumper legs, but then we say arbe, limino. So that's a prat and another klal. Then we have sarav, salam, limineu, chargol, limineu, chagav, limineu. So those are klal, ufratz, uklal. So we're going to be learning, we're going to be bringing in more items as well. So that's the big difference between the Bryce and the Taras Kohanim and the Tanit of Rabbi Shmuel about, are we learning these psukim by grasshoppers as klal ufrat, like the Bryce and Taras Kohanim, or klal ufrat uchlal, like the Tanit of Rabbi Shmuel is learning. Now, the Rabbi Shmuel Tana, they learn by the Besmedrsh of Rabbi Shmuel, elu klale klalis ve'elu prate pratis. Okay, this is interesting. Be'etzem, the way that the Tanit of Rabbi Shmuel learns it is that of these 4 items, and we're gonna, it's kind of a bit tricky concept to understand until we see it play out in the Gemara. But of these 4 prat uklaus, arbe, salam, chargol, chagav, 2 of them are, we need to, the pasuk needs to teach us about the klal, prat uklal, but 2 of them are extra, and they are used to learn additional things that we're going to see at the Gemara. But klaus, you have klal followed by some extra klaus. The elu klaus ve'elu prate pratis, and there are prats that are followed by additional prats. Okay, we'll see how it plays out in the Gemara. Arba ze govai, that the arba is govai, as we said earlier. Lemino, when we said lemino, lehavi tzipores kromim, to include the tzipores kromim. Givaldik. Ein li elo haba ve'ein lo gabachas. Gabachas means a bald spot. So to not have a bald spot means that it has hair. So the arbet has hair, apparently. I don't know what it means for a grasshopper to have hair, but I guess it has some kind of a hairy, fuzzy head. So the Gemara says, okay, so this is Tanit of Rabbi Shmuel, who learns our klal ufrat uklal. Okay, so we had the general concept of any grasshopper that has these jumping legs, but then we specified arbe, and we said limino. So we're saying we can include other grasshoppers that are like it. So now, okay, let's go weiter. So ein li ela haba ve'ein lo gabacha. So all I know is that I can include grasshoppers that don't have a bald spot, i.e. grasshoppers that have hair, like the arbe. Haba ve'yesh lo gabachas. What about a grasshopper that doesn't have hair? How would we know about those? Right, from arbe we can only include grasshoppers that do have hair. What about grasshoppers that don't have hair, like the salam? So minayin tam lo salam zen nipol, that the salam is the nipol, which is interesting because earlier we had said that the salam is the Russian, and here we're saying it's the nipol. We're going to get to that. I think not today. We're going to get to that tomorrow. We can get to that tomorrow. We're not going to get to that today. But if anybody noticed, right, the salam earlier we said was the Russian, and now we're saying it's the nipol. Okay. So salam's a nipol. Limineu lavi is a ushkif. And when it says limineu, it's coming to include the ushkif. Ve'ein li ela abba ve'ein lo gabachas, abba ve'yesh lo gabachas. Okay, fine. So we've so far learned about 2 items. The arbe has hair. We've learned about now the salam doesn't have hair. So I know, okay, we can include grasshoppers that have hair, that don't have hair. Now, above ein lo zonav, and both the arbe and the salam don't have tails. Above yesh lo zonav minayin. Now, how do we know to include even grasshoppers that do have grasshopper tails? Tamlomer chargol, they're Russian. So it says chargol, which is the Russian. Limineu, when it says limineu, lo'avi as a karsepes ves a shachlonis. Oh. Okay, so we come to include also grasshoppers that have tails. Okay, so far we have read the pasuk has listed the arbe, the salam, the chargol. From arbe, we come to include grasshoppers that have hair. From salam, we include grasshoppers that don't have hair. And neither of those have tails. And comes the chargol to include even grasshoppers that have tails. Okay. Haba, says I just mentioned in the recap just a second ago that, okay, so I know that you can eat grasshoppers that have hair, grasshoppers that don't have hair. Haba ve'enlo zonav, haba ve'yeshlo zonav, grasshoppers that don't have tails, grasshoppers that do have grasshopper tails. Haba ve'en rosho aruch, and finally, all of these examples so far, arbe, salam, chargol, they all have compact heads. Haba ve'rosho aruch minayin. What about a grasshopper that has a long head? How do you know that we can enjoy that as well? Fry it with a little butter and a little salt. So Omar, Hare, Atadon, Bininab Mishloshin. So how do we know that you can even enjoy grasshoppers with long heads? Well, we'll learn it out from the ones that we know already. Let's learn it out from Arbe, Salam, Chargol. Lori Arbe Kiri Chargol, Lori Chargol Kiri Arbe. Look, Arbe and Chargol, that's example 1 and example 3. Arbe and Chargol are opposites. Arbe has hair and doesn't have a tail. Chargol has a tail and doesn't have hair. They're opposites. Right? The power of Lori Arbe Kiri Chargol, the nature of Arbe is different than the nature of Chargol. They're opposites. Lori Chargol Kiri Arbe, and the nature of the Chargol is different than the nature of the Arbe. Again, they're opposites in terms of hair and tails. V'lori Ishneim Kiri Salam. V'lori Salam Kiri Shneim, and both of them are different than the Salam. Remember, the Arbe has hair, doesn't have a tail. The Chargol doesn't have hair but has a tail. The Salam has neither hair nor a tail. So each of these examples are unique. What do they have in common? What they have in common, sheyesh lo daled raglaim, they have the 4 simanim, 4 legs, varba knafayim, 4 wings, v'kartzulayim, 2 jumper legs, v'knaf of chofen es rubo, and that its wings cover most of its body. So even though the Arbe, the Salam, the Chargol are each have their differences, what they have in common is that they have the 4 simanim. So af kol sheyesh lo arba raglaim varba knafayim v'kartzulayim v'chnafav chofen es rubo. So I'll come and include any grasshoppers that have those 4 simanim, even if they have a long head. What about a cricket? Who wants to eat crickets? Who wants to eat crickets? You can go to the shuk, buy a kilo of crickets. Maybe while I'm recording Babble on Talmud, I have a bag of crickets next to me. I'll just snack on them. These crickets, Yeshlo Arbra Glaim, it has 4 legs, Vidal Knafayim, and 4 wings, Vikartsulayim, and these jumper legs, Viknaf of Chofen es Ruba, and its wings cover most of its body. Sounds like crickets should be kosher, huh? Yachol Ye Mutter, is it possible they're kosher? Talmud Lomar, Chagov. Here's important. Well, we got an extra, right? So far we've been learning we learned from Arbe, we learned from Salam, we learned from Chargol. The one we haven't learned out from, the one that's extra, the one that hasn't been learned out from yet is Chagov. What do we learn from Chagov? Sheshmo Chagov. Its name needs to be Chagov. And crickets are called crickets, they're not called Chagovs. So you can't eat crickets. That's what we learn from Chagov. Sheshmo Chagov, it has to be called a Chagov. Ishmo Chagov, if its name is Chagov, Yachol Einbo Kol Simanim Alalu. Now what if you have a grasshopper that's called a Chagov, but it doesn't have these 4 simanim, doesn't have the 4 legs, doesn't have the 4 wings, etc. So Tamilom Limineu, Achie, Bo, Kol Simanim Alalu. No. It says a Chagov Limineu, it needs to have all of these signs. So this is already an example of what we said earlier from the Talmud of Rabbi Shmuel, that klale klalos, prate pratos, that there are klaus and then there are extra klaus. There are prats and there are extra prats. So chagav was an extra prat, chagav, and an extra klal of limineu. We're going to see that there's another one. How's everybody doing so far? So where are we at so far? Where we're at is Arbet includes grasshoppers that have hair. Salam includes grasshoppers that don't have hair. Now both Arbet and Salam don't have tails. Chargo comes to include grasshoppers that have tails. Right? Chargo comes to include grasshoppers that have tails. Chagav comes to tell us that it has to be called a chagav. And how do we know that we can even eat grasshoppers that have long heads? That was learned out from the Tzad HaShovet, from the Arbet, Salam, and Chargo, that all of them have the 4 simanim and they're kosher. So let's also say that a grasshopper with a long head is kosher because it also has the 4 simanim. Fregde Gemara, Parach Rav Achai. Rav Achai asked the following questions. Malahanoch Shekain Ein Roshan Aruch. Rav Achai asked the obvious question though. Arbet, Salam, and what's the last one? I don't know. Chargo. Arbet, Salam, and Chargo are different than the long-headed grasshopper because they all have short heads. So sure, they all, like we said, they all have their differences in terms of having hair, tails, etc. But what they all had in common is that they have the 4 simanim, so let's also include the long-headed grasshopper. But it says Gemara, it says Rav Achai, but also what they have in common is that they don't have long heads. They have, let's call them just normal heads, regular heads. They all have regular heads. So let's say that they're only coming to include grasshoppers that have the 4 simanim, but also have small heads like them. Maybe I wouldn't include the long-headed grasshopper. Again, Paruch Rav Achai, Malahanach Sheken Ein Roshan Aruch. Their heads are not long like the long-headed grasshopper. V'chitema kevan tishavu b'dalet simanim. But and if you're going to say, yeah, okay, but let's focus on their what they have in common rather than their differences. Let's focus on their similarities rather than their differences. All of these examples, including the long-headed grasshopper, have the 4 simanim. Let's focus on that. V'chitema kevan tishavu b'dalet simanim. Ma'isinan v'lo parchinon. We say that the long-headed grasshopper can be eaten, and we're not going to ask questions. Let's just focus on the fact that all of them have the 4 simanim. If that's the case, chargol nami, well then the chargol as well. The third example, dishavu lehu, which also has the 4 simanim, lo lichtov, leave it out, v'teisim ma'arbe v'salam. Well, one second. If that's the case, that we're saying even though the grasshopper with the long head is different than the others, let's focus on the fact that, well, they all have the 4 simanim. Well, why don't we also we don't need the pasuk for the chargol. Once I have arbe and I have salam, why do I need a pasuk for chargol? Let's just say that just like the arbe and the salam have the 4 simanim, so does the chargol. So let's just say that it's kosher, just like we're saying that by the long-headed grasshopper. Ella ikal mifrach. But if you would do that, if you would say, well, let's just focus on the fact that the chargol also has the 4 simanim, I don't need a pasuk for it. But then you'll ask, malahanach shekain ein len zonav. You say, no, you can't learn out chargol from arbe and salam. They don't have tails. Chargol has a tail. So achinami, so here also when it comes to the long-headed grasshopper, you can ask the same thing, in the same vein. The long-headed grasshopper has a long head. These have short heads. Nu. So if we're just going to say let's focus on the commonalities, well then we don't need the pasuk for chargol. And if we're going to say that no, you can't learn out chargol from arbe and salam because it's different, well, the long-headed grasshopper is also different. So Elo Omer of Achai, says Rav Achai, look, Salam Yiseru. Okay. Says Rav Achai, we don't need Salam. Upon evaluating the situation, we actually don't need a pasuk for Salam. Salam is extra. Salam is extra. Lo lichtov rachmana salam, leave out Salam, which is the second example. V'teisim me'arba u'mechargol, and learn it out from arbe and chargol. The my parchas, what are you going to ask? Mala arbe de ein lo gabachas. Arbe has hair. Hari chargol de yesh lo gabachas. But chargol doesn't have hair. Mala chargol de yesh lo zonav, but the chargol has a tail. Hari arbe de ein lo zonav. Arbe doesn't have a tail. No, what's going on here? We're saying, the Gemara says, look, here's the deal. Here is the deal. Salam is extra. Let's review Arbe, Salam, and Chargol. Arbe has hair, does not have a tail. Salam has neither hair nor tail. Chargol has no hair, but has a tail. So says the Gemara, leave out Salam, leave out the middle one. And let's say that just like the Arbe and the Chargol have the 4 simanim and they're kosher, so the Salam also has 4 simanim and it is kosher. You're going to say, okay, but 1 second, the Salam doesn't have hair, and the Chargol has hair. Okay, no, I'm sorry, the Salam doesn't have hair, but the Arbe does have hair. Okay, but the Chargol doesn't have hair, so let's learn that out from the Chargol. If you say, okay, but the Chargol has a tail, the Salam doesn't have a tail. Okay, but the Arbe doesn't have a tail either, and it's kosher. So therefore, we don't need to write Salam. We can learn out Salam right between the Arbe and between the Chargol. They can come to include Salam, right? After all, this is Tana Devar Bishmal. They're learning out Klal, Ufrad, Uchlal. You can come and you can teach similar things. So it's coming and teaching the Chargol. Okay, now if that's the case, I'm sorry, it's coming and teaching the Salam. Sorry, it's a little tricky. I was thinking about maybe making a slide for it. I wasn't sure that a slide was really going to be that helpful here. Maybe it would have been helpful just if I wrote out like the trait, which has hair, which doesn't, but I don't know. Anyways. Salam is extra and Chagav are extra. Now, if you remember, the Tana Devar Bishmal had said Klale Klalos and Prate Pratus, right? That there are going to be klals and there are going to be extra klals. There's going to be prats and there's going to be extra prats. The extra klals and prats are the Salam, which we just said can be included from the Arbe and the Chargol, and also the Chagav, which we had said earlier was extra, and it teaches that it has to have the name Chagav. So Salam now is also extra. So what are we learning out from Salam? It's extra. Why is it there? Why is there a pasuk about Salam? So Salam, the cause of Achmana Lamali, why do I have a pasuk for Salam? Why does the pasuk say Salam? Imenu Inyan Legufo, if we don't need it for itself, because that's learned out from Arbe and Chargol, Taneu Inyan, Lerosho Aruch. Let's say that Salam is coming to include a grasshopper with a long head. And now basically all of our bases are covered. We have the Arbe, we have the Chargol, that we need them to be written. The Chagav is coming to say that the name needs to be called the Chagav. Salam can be learned out from Arbe and from Chargol. The reason why it's written is to include even a long-headed grasshopper. Givaldig. I'm out to wrap up the daf at the top of Samach Vav Maral. B'may kamiflage Tana Devei Rav Vitana Devei Rab Yishmael. What's the machlekes? What's essentially the nafka between Tana Devei Rav? It's interesting that the Gemara is referring to the Brisa in Torah's Kohanim as the Tana Devei Rav. It means that Be'etzim, what does Rashi say? Kar leBrisa kamaisa shnuya b'Torah's Kohanim Demikre Sifra, which is called Sifra Devei Rab, Levisha Aya Shagar Bebeis Hamedrash B'fi Kulam. This was a well-known Brisa. Torah's Kohanim was well-known in the Beis Hamedrash among the students. Therefore, it was called the Tana Devei Rab, the Brisa from the Beis Hamedrash. So what's the difference between the Tana Devei Rav and Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, which was specifically taught in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Shmuel and less known? So Barosho Aruch Kamiflage, so the nafkamina between the Tana Devei Rav and the Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel is Davka, the grasshopper with the long head. We saw that according to Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel, it is included because he learns that the klal and the prat and the klal, and it comes to essentially a Solomon is coming to include the grasshopper, whereas the long-headed grasshopper, whereas Tana Devei Rab had said it was klal uprat, it's limited to the arbe, salam, chargol, chagav, and limineu. Each one came to include one more. That's it. No long-headed grasshoppers. Tana Devei Rav Sovar. Tana Devei Rav holds asher lo kra'ayim klal, that the first pasuk about including all grasshoppers that have jumper legs, that's the first klal. Arbe, salam, chargol, chagav, as well as limineu, right? Each one includes another one, so there's 8 examples. Prat, klal ufrat. When you have a klal followed by a prat, ein bichlal elo mash beprat. All right, the klal is completely limited to the examples in the prat. So there are 8 examples of edible grasshoppers. That is it. Demine in, delab mine lo. We can only include that which is of those types that were included. Umarbe de domile mishneit stadin, and it can only include things that are entirely right, that are entirely similar, that both sides of the equation are the same. Whereas Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel Sovar asher lo kra'ayim klal, that when it says grasshoppers that have these jumper legs, that's a klal. Arbe, salom, chargol, chagav, prat. And there, right, those 4 prats, limineu, but each one also says limineu, chazar v'chala, which is klal ufadu chlal. Klal ufadu chlal, iato don, ele ke'ena prat. So when you have a klal, prat, and a klal, we can include things that are similar to the prat. Umar be called domilate bechad sad, and we can include things that are similar even just in one way, right? We can include, for example, the salam, which only had one similarity with the arbe and with the chargo. Viha lo dami klala kama lichlala basra. But how can we say klal fadu klal? The first klal is different than the second klal. Klal kama, the first klal, asher lo kra'ayim amar achmana de isle echol de leisle lo seichel, that the first klal focuses only on the jumper legs. If it has the jumper legs, you can eat it. If not, not. The klal basar, but the second klal, ad shavu barba simanim, focuses on having all 4 simanim. Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel bichlale ufrate ki agavna da'in. Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel has no problem learning out klal ufratzu klals in this manner when the klal is different than is dissimilar to the first klal and the second klal have their differences. V'da'amino nami ba'alma d'dayin Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel. And whenever we say, in general, that Tana Devei Rabbi Shmuel has no problem learning out klal ufratzu klals like these, this is the makar for it. This is the basis for it from the klals of the grasshoppers. Givaldig. Okay, that was Daf Samachet, Daf 65 Masechta Chullin. I think it was a Givaldig Daf, but it did get trickier and trickier, because it kind of was like it layered onto itself. I don't know. I still wonder if maybe I should have made slides. I just still, I don't know. Maybe they would have helped. Akopanim. The first part of the daf, we wrapped up the discussion of kosher birds. So where did we land with that discussion? Ultimately, we landed that there are 3 kosher signs of a bird. Technically, maybe you could say 4. And there are 3 non-kosher signs of a bird. The non-kosher signs of a bird is if it's dores, it's not kosher. If it divides up its toes when it's standing on like a wire. And a third one that we learned about today is if it catches and eats food mid-air. The kosher signs are if there is a extra toe in the back, if there is a zefek and a korkavan that peels, and arguably also if it is not doris, which is essentially just the opposite of if it's doris, it's not kosher. If it is not doris, then it is kosher. And then we discussed the kosher grasshoppers. We said in order for a grasshopper to be kosher, it has to have 4 legs, 4 wings that cover most of its body, and the two jumper legs. We said in the Gemara that even if those jumper legs are going to come later, and the grasshopper doesn't currently have them yet, that is okay. And then we saw this big machlokes between the brisa in Toras Kohanim in Toras Kohanim in the Medrash Halacha of Sefer Vayikra, between that brisa and the Tana Devei Reb Yishmael, about how exactly to learn out the psukim by grasshoppers. Is it a klal prat like the Toras Kohanim, like they learn out in Toras Kohanim, or is it klal ufrad uchlal like they learn out in the Tana Devei Reb Yishmael? And the big nafkamina was, what about grasshoppers with long necks? According to Tana Devei Reb Yishmael, that they learn out klal ufrad uchlal, you can enjoy that grasshopper with the long neck. According to the Bryce and Toras Kohanim, you cannot eat the grasshopper with the long neck. Chever, I hope you enjoyed. Catch you later. Cheers.